This is for all of you Game of Thrones fans. Did you know that you can visit a real-life Winterfell Castle in Northern Ireland? That's right, and it's called Old Castle Ward that played Winterfell Castle and home to the House Stark. It makes a fabulous day trip from Belfast in Northern Ireland, and there are many filming locations that you can visit nearby in County Down, such as Audley's Field and Castle, Inch Abbey that played part of Riverrun, Tollymore Forest Park that played Winterfell lands where you can take a Game of Thrones trek, and I'll even throw in where you can find some Game of Thrones doors. Let's go.
Good morning everyone, today I'm here on a Game of Thrones filming location tour of Northern Ireland, and I'm starting off my trip at Inch Abbey, which is the ruins here. I'm really excited to see this. Completely free to visit Inch Abbey, and then I'm going to be heading to Castle Ward, which was part of the Winterfell Castle and Woods. Yeah, let's have a look inside.
So yes, Inch Abbey Ruins is a gorgeous Cistercian abbey in Downpatrick, County Down, and it makes a great stop on your Game of Thrones filming location tour, as this featured as Riverrun in the series. If you remember, in Game of Thrones Season 1, Robb Stark camps out after the Battle of the Whispering Wood against the Lannisters. These events take place after Joffrey has taken the throne, and he asks Robb Stark to pay him fealty. Robb refuses as he knows his father has been held prisoner at King's Landing. Robb calls his bannermen and marches Stark's soldiers to go to war with the Lannisters, and Robb goes on to win the Battle of the Whispering Wood, taking Jaime Lannister as prisoner. Robb camps near Riverrun, and it's here that Robb hears from his mother Catelyn that his father Ned has been executed. So the houses of the North and Riverlands show fealty to Robb and cry out, "The King of the North," and so starts the beginning of the War of the Five Kings. All of these camp scenes in Riverrun take place in and around the Inch Abbey ruins. Even if you're not a fan of Game of Thrones, you should still visit the Cistercian monastery, as it was founded in 1180 by John de Courcy, who led the Anglo-Norman invasion of East Ulster. There is a legend that he built Inch Abbey as penance for his destruction of the Erenna Abbey in 1177, and the name comes from the Irish word Innis, meaning island. Although today we can easily walk or drive to Inch Abbey, in the 12th century this monastery was surrounded by the River Quoile. It was an island that you had to travel to by boat. There was a place of worship on this island before Inch Abbey, but it was made of wood and was burnt down during the Viking invasions of the 9th century. This Cistercian monastery was a huge complex that housed monks from the abbeys of Lancashire and Erenag. They had a church, refectories, an infirmary, and even a bakehouse. Monastic life here was quite basic, but they were wealthy by medieval standards, and the monastery was dissolved in 1541 during the dissolution of the monasteries by King Henry VIII. It's now a romantic ruin beside the River Quoile and is famous for being a Game of Thrones location. During your visit, you can visit the locations where Catelyn Stark walks towards Robb, who was not impressed with the news of his father's death, and the tree that Robb fights with his sword. You can also see the windows of the Abbey ruins behind where Robb, Catelyn, and notable members of House Stark have a banquet discussing who should be King of the North. Another reason why you should visit Inch Abbey is because it has a picture-perfect view of Downpatrick Cathedral, one of the most famous temples in Northern Ireland. And the area Downpatrick gets its name from the patron saint of Ireland, St. Patrick. After you leave Inch Abbey, make sure to pay a visit to the River Quoile Nature Reserve. Here you can visit another Game of Thrones location, which is again featured as Riverrun. This beautiful area featured in Riverrun in Series 3, Episode 3, Walk of Punishment. This was the location of Hoster Tully's funeral. It's very easy to get to, free, and there's parking nearby.
Okay, so now I've left Inch Abbey and I'm here at Castle Ward, which is Winterfell. This is where lots of the scenes are filmed, like Bran falling out of the tower, and the archery, when they're practicing the archery. If you wanted to do Castle Ward, there are 2 car parks. Make sure to park in the shore entrance to do the Game of Thrones stuff, because that's nearest to the farmyard, which is where I'm heading now.
So the old Castle Ward and demesne forms part of the Castle Ward estate owned by the National Trust. Here they use this area for Winterfell Castle and the surroundings, and there were many notable scenes that you can see around your visit. Around Old Castle Ward you can see many notable Game of Thrones filming locations, such as when Robert Baratheon arrives with his caravan, where Bran, Robb and Jon are practicing archery in the farmyard, where Arya's sword needle is prepared in the blacksmiths, and where Bran is spying on the king. What I really loved about Old Castle Ward is they really embrace the Game of Thrones theme here, and they have several activities that you can do, including archery, which I will include later in this video. You can practice archery in the very same place where the Stark children practice during the show. Winterfell Tours have an office on site where you can book this experience, or you can do one of their cycling tours and see over 20 Game of Thrones filming locations around the site. They will give you a map what you can follow, and then you can visit all of these locations yourself on a self-guided tour. As part of your visit, make sure to see this Game of Thrones sign that will give you some behind the scene pictures and information.
So I've just left Castle Ward Farmyard area, which is where they did a lot of the archery sessions and things like that. And now I'm going to be heading to Audley Castle, which is a really cute coastal walk from Castle Ward. It's about 20 minutes to get there, and then they have a few filming locations there. And then I'm going to end my trip right back at the mansion where there's two more, where Ned has his picnic. National Trust have a really good map actually that you can follow of all the Game of Thrones locations. They even have Winterfell signs around the site as well, which is really cool. Sure, the Audley Castle is the tower where Brienne discovered the twins and then was pushed out of the tower. So I'm really excited to see this. It's a very atmospheric ancient tower that obviously became quite famous with Game of Thrones. I think it's National Trust protected, so yeah, it should be free entry. Of course, there's lots of trails here to do. Audley Castle, and there's other ones as well. Yeah, really excited to see.
On your scenic walk by Strangford Lough towards Audley's Field and Audley Castle, make sure to look out for some Game of Thrones filming locations that happened around here. You can find the scene where Brienne stumbles upon three ladies hanging from a tree and then decides to take her revenge on the Starkmen that did it. These were the scenes where she has Jaime Lannister in tow. It's good to note that when you're making your way by Strangford Lough, you'll be heading all around on a big loop to get to the castle, so allow around 20 to 30 minutes to reach. But the great thing about this walk is that it's really scenic, and then you get picture-perfect views of the castle in the distance. Some of the Game of Thrones filming locations are pointed out on signs as you make your way around, and eventually you'll reach Audley's Field, which played the scene of Oxcross in Game of Thrones. So we see Audley's Field in a couple of scenes during Game of Thrones. One is where Robert Baratheon arrives, and then in Series 2, this field becomes Robb Camp in the Battle of Oxcross. It's here that Robb meets Talissa, who is a healer from Volantis, and while she is tending wounded soldiers, Robb falls in love with her and he later asks her to marry him. And all of these scenes happen in Series 2, Episode 4, The Garden of Bones. Just beyond this, you will find Audley's Castle, which featured in Game of Thrones as well. This tower featured as the twins in Game of Thrones, and the other tower and crossing were inserted with CGI. You'll recognise Audley Castle when Theon Greyjoy takes down one of the messenger ravens from World of Frey's towers sent to warn about Robb's army. Although Castle Ward is only protected by the National Trust, Audley's Castle is not included in that. It's free to visit the outside of the site, but they only open up the castle on certain days, and so you may not be able to go inside on your visit. Regardless, I thought the walk was really scenic, and I really enjoyed my visit to Audley Castle. The views of Strangford Lough from the keep are fabulous. Castle Ward is a great day out, and you could spend hours walking around their pretty trails, walking by their lakes and trees and forest routes. Before you leave, make sure to visit Downpatrick Avenue, where you can see where Ned had a picnic and the Baelor battlefield.
Here in Tollymore Forest Park in Northern Ireland, and I'm going to be going on a Game of Thrones walking tour with Game of Thrones tours. It should be really, really good. I've actually just come for this part of the tour. They're going to be heading on all of the Game of Thrones locations today. I've just come for the walking tour, which you can do. It's very affordable. It's only £10 an adult, and you get your own cloak to go around Winterfell Forest. So yeah, come and join me on a walking tour of Tollymore Forest. We're walking pretty quickly through Winterfell Forest. I wasn't expecting this to be so rushed, but yeah. So yeah, we got our cloaks and we're heading through to, I think, the first filming location. Okay, so I thought I'd hang a little back a bit because it's just a little fast for me. But yeah, we're just walking along the river, which is really, really nice. Channeling my inner Sansa with my cloak on, which is nice. But yeah, I would just say, like, if you want to take pictures, hang back a little bit because it can be a little rushed. Luckily I have more time in the forest afterwards to come and get pictures, but it just feels a little bit like we're just rushing through, which is a bit of a shame. But there we are. I think we're getting to one of our first locations. Wow, I can see the stepping stones. Right.
So Tollymore Forest Park is a gorgeous fairy tale park in Northern Ireland where they filmed many scenes from Game of Thrones. And I decided to do a Game of Thrones trek to see some of the Game of Thrones filming locations, and the reason why I loved this so much is because you're actually led by some of the actors who were featured in the show. So for us, we were led by a wildling chieftain through this forest in our Game of Thrones cloaks, and he had an iPad which showed us notable scenes from the show where they were filmed as we were looking at them, which was really, really cool. But what I would say is that it's on a really strict pace because they had a tight time frame. However, I really, really enjoyed it. Our first stop was the Wildling Pit, which was in the very first scenes of Game of Thrones, and this is the episode Winter is Coming, and you'll recognise it as the land south of the wall with the Wildling Pit and the forest near Winterfell Castle. You'll recognise this scene when the Night Watch scouts to see the White Walkers who have killed a load of people here. It actually took several months for them to set up Tollymore Forest Park as a winter scene in the snow, and they had to use lots and lots of sheets to protect the land. You'll also see some scenes when Jon and Tyrion are making their way up to the wall and they camp out here. There's even a stump that you can sit on where Jon Snow sat on it in the show. Other notable scenes are where Ned is making his way through Winterfell lands with his children, and you can visit the area around the river where they found the direwolf pups. If you remember, this is where they found all of the direwolf pups for the Stark children, and then they found a little runt pup for Jon Snow. As well as loving all of these scenes from Game of Thrones, you can see just how beautiful Tollymore Forest Park is, and so even if you're not a Game of Thrones fan, I would recommend visiting here. There is so much to see, including the famous stepping stones and the grotto, which was used by the nobility in the 18th century.
Into Tollymore Forest Park now that the tour group's gone. It was really, really good tour. Learned a lot. You know, we had a little iPad where we could watch some of the scenes, which was really effective, so you could see what took place there, which is great. But I need just a little bit more time to go back and take some content, so I'll show you a little bit more along the riverbanks and the stepping stones and things like that. So yeah, let's go and do it.
So Tollymore Forest Park covers just over 630 hectares at the foot of the Moor Mountains in County Down. Years ago, this used to be the estate of the Earls of Clanbrassil, who used to live in Tollymore House. James Hilton, the first Earl of Clanbrassil, was mainly responsible for the grottos, follows and bridges that you can find around the park, and they were designed by Thomas Wright of Durham, who was a close friend. His son, James Hamilton, the second Earl of Clanbrassil, then added on to this with the estate entrance and exit gates. Tollymore is also the earliest arboretum in Ireland, and the planting began in 1752. It has several owners over time, but today it's a public park that anyone can enjoy. Notable features are the incredible stepping stones and waterfall, and this water comes from the Shimna River that snakes through the park. You can also visit the Hermitage, which acted as a summer house and a grotto to cool off in the summer months. It's where ladies would sit and cool off in the house while the men went fishing down in the river below. There are also several walks that you can take in the area, like the River Trail, the Arboretum Path, the Mountain Trail and the Drins. Entry is free to Tollymore Forest Park, but you do have to pay for parking, and it's £5 a car. I would make sure to leave lots of time here, at least 3 hours to explore, because every corner of this estate is like a fairy tale forest. It is absolutely stunning. This ended up being one of my favourite places in all of Northern Ireland, and I really enjoyed heading along to some of the Game of Thrones filming locations around here. And some of these scenes are some of my favourite parts of the show, so yeah, it really made this whole visit special.
We went to the Wildling Pit, which is just a few steps away from the wooden bridge that you pass just after the stepping stones. So I'm going to go back there now and show you. Yeah, let's have a look. Apparently when we were on the tour, there's a tree that still has some remains of the filming from 10 years ago. So let's have a look. He was telling us that the whole forest had to be filled with sheets just so that they could film the scene. because snow doesn't really reach the floor here. So when they were setting up Winterfell, or the wall, the sort of area around the wall, they couldn't have a lot of snow. So they basically put sheets all the way through the forest and then put fake snow down. Usually it's like shredded paper, salts, things like that. And then as soon as they were done, they picked it all up and then removed it. So yeah, let's go have a look. Okay, so on your way back from the wildling pit, before you get to the wooden bridge, you'll find a very distinctive crooked tree right on the riverbank, and this is where Tyrion and Jon Snow have a discussion on their way over to the wall when Jon's been posted there. And there is a stump that Kit Ramsay sat on. If you are a fan, you can get your photo taken there. So.
Before you leave the park, make sure to stop at the Barbican Gate. This gate was built in 1780 and was designed by the architect Thomas Wright of Durham. It used to act as security, but is now a pretty folly. Also, I would stop by the Percy French in Newcastle to take a picture of their amazing Game of Thrones door.
Okay, so when you come to Castle Ward, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, you have to book one of the Winterfell tours that are here, and it's an archery experience that I'm going to be heading to in a minute. And essentially, you stand exactly where Bran stood with Jon and his brothers in the archery area, and that's where they were practicing their archery. If you remember, Ned says, "Who of you was a marksman at 10? Keep practicing, Brad." And that's where you can go now. So I'm going to be heading there to do an archery tour and end my trip here in Northern Ireland with the Game of Thrones location.
So yes, after my first visit to Castle Ward, I came back to enjoy an archery session with the Winterfell tour. This is where you can enjoy some archery lessons of where they filmed it in the show. The staff here are really friendly, and they give you a Winterfell cloak that you can don while you're doing your archery lesson, and they welcome tourists from around the world to take part. I absolutely loved this, but I found out that I truly suck at archery. I thought it was going to be easy, but I'm telling you, there is so much more to this than meets the eye. I'm left-handed anyway, which is always awkward when handling archery equipment, but I also just couldn't get the arm right. It took a lot of goes, and we had a mini competition with our team. Every time we shot an arrow, we get a certain amount of points, and then those points would tot up what we got at the very end. Unfortunately, I really didn't do too well at this, and so I ended up losing, and my punishment was a beheading.
Champion of the archery competition, sentence you, Sophie, to die for your failures. I can't. It's gonna get so messy.
Now to end my trip here at Castle Ward, but I've had such a good time here today. I'm going to be heading over to the Cuan, I think, for dinner, and also with Strangford to do a couple of the Journey of Doors, which I'll explain in a little bit.
So my original plan was to visit the Cuan and see one of their amazing original Game of Thrones doors while having some dinner, but unfortunately the Strangford ferry decided to close early for the night, so this changed my plans. I quickly grabbed my stamp for the Game of Thrones door from the friendly bar staff, and then ended up getting this cute car ferry to the other side of Strangford Lough. On this side of the river, you can find some Game of Thrones doors and a Game of Thrones filming location, and getting the ferry just saves a lot of time on the road. These ferries usually run pretty regularly, and you can just drive onto the ferry and buy your ticket. It's as simple as that, and it will take you across the water.
So I stopped at the Cuan to get my passport Strangford ferry, and I'm going to be heading to the Fiddler's Green to get my passport stamped. I'm nearly on my last door, and there's also a Game of Thrones filming location here called Quintin Castle and Bay, which I'm going to head to now.
So if you didn't know, there are a series of Game of Thrones doors around Northern Ireland in certain pubs, and you can grab a passport to tick them all off as you go. One of these doors is in Fiddler's Green, and yep, this was my last door of the trip. All of the pubs with these doors make great places to eat or drink while you're chasing some of the Game of Thrones filming locations in Northern Ireland, and I would highly recommend doing it.
Okay, so now I'm outside the Fiddler's Green in Strangford. I just got the Strangford ferry, and yeah, I'm just seeing my last door, and I've absolutely loved doing this journey of doors. Passport, I've got all of my stamps, apart from Gracehill House, but you know, that wasn't my fault, so yeah, really happy to do it, and I would highly recommend it. Just left Fiddler's Green, and my last stop of the day is Quintin Bay, right near Quintin Castle, so I'm going to go see that now. I don't have long because the last ferry is at 8:15, so I've got to get moved on.
So Quintin Bay is in Strangford and featured as Castle Stokeworth in Game of Thrones. This featured in Game of Thrones Season 5, Episode 2, The House of Black and White. After Jaime Lannister promises to bring Bysella back from Dawn, he visits Sir John of the Blackwater at Castle Stokeworth and asks him to help him. He says that if Sir Bronn joins him, he'll promise him a better castle, better land, and a more beautiful wife. So you can't enter Castle Stokeworth unless you're staying there or attending an event, but you can still see this amazing Norman castle from the grounds or take a walk around the bay, and I was here at sunset and the sky and colours were just amazing. It was such a lovely walk around, and you can really see some of the Game of Thrones influences here for Castle Stokeworth. There are even palm trees around the estate which made it look quite tropical, and you can get a really good view of Castle Stokeworth from the entrance as you drive in. I mean, look at how pretty that is. After that, it was time to catch my Strangford ferry back to the other side of the Lough, but I had such a great time chasing down some Game of Thrones filming locations in Northern Ireland and visiting the REAL Winterfell Castle. Thank you for joining me on my journey, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe for more magic. Thank you.